So hi, everybody. Happy Friday. Can everybody hear me, see me? Still good? Okay. So thank you so much for coming to our Friday Lunch and Learn. We are trying to do these monthly, and today's topic is talking with children about adoption. My name is Olga Marable. I'm the Director of Outreach for Fusion Academy, our Maryland campuses. That's Rockville and Columbia campuses, but we also are here representing our Loudoun, Alexandria, Tysons, and DC campuses in the DMV area. Just a little bit of background about Fusion for those of you guys who might not know about us. We are a private school, 6th through 12th grade. We specialize in one-to-one learning, individualized academics, as well as our homework cafe, providing a social, emotional opportunity experience for our students, executive functioning support, and we are doing virtual as well as in-person options. So feel free to reach out to me if you are interested in learning more for your clients, seeing how we can be a solution for full-time, part-time, or tutoring schooling support. All right, so a little bit of housekeeping before we jump in. As I mentioned, this is being recorded. I will send all of you a link at the end so that way you can rewatch or share it with your colleagues. Please feel free to share it. It will be on our YouTube page. Throughout the webinar, please keep yourself muted unless you have a question. If you have a question, feel free to unmute and go ahead and ask. Otherwise, we would just want to reduce that noise, background noise. Also for your names, if you guys can rename yourselves, I would really appreciate that. It helps me with taking attendance as well as being able to address you if you're asking questions. So just rename it to your first name and your last name, so that way we know who's here. The chat, it will remain open, so feel free to utilize it throughout the webinar. Feel free to collaborate with those who are attending today. Feel free to network, share your business information if you want to. Definitely encourage it. Erica, the presenter, will not be moderating the chat, but I will be. So if you have any questions for me, feel free to ask them in the chat, or you can even direct message me. That is completely fine too. And Erica will be answering questions throughout the presentation. So you can ask questions in the chat and I will grab them when it's appropriate for a pause and ask on your behalf, or when there's a pause, feel free to unmute yourself and ask the question. We will also have a link through Q&A at the very end of the presentation. I do just ask that you keep your questions appropriate and not too personal. We are expecting at least 60 people on today. All right, and then about the CEU credits for those who are on today who would like to get credits. I will provide an evaluation link at the end of the presentation. You will need to complete that survey in order to get your CEU credits. You will be asked to include an email address in that evaluation. That is where your certificate will be sent, and the certificates will be sent by November 30th. So just wanted to let you guys know about that. I will repeat all of this at the end too. Erica's also provided all of her PowerPoint presentations and resources. So along with the recording link for this, I will include all the presentation materials at the end so that way you guys can refer to that. All right, well, I would love to know who is here. So if you guys can utilize our chat, please enter your name, what you do, and maybe a fun fact. So like my chat would say, my name is Olga Marable, I'm the Director of Outreach, and fun fact is my parents are taking both of our two very little children for the entire weekend. So I'm gonna be doing nothing but relaxing, which is perfect before a holiday weekend. All right, does anybody else want to share? Let's see who's here. I will call it out. Fun facts, love to learn about who's here joining us today. And feel free to use the chat for that. I'll read them out. Judy Byer, hey there. Oh my gosh, come on guys. I usually get like 50 of these, I can't read them. Oh, there they go. Hi, Erica. Hi, Camille. Marcel, Kathleen. You've been enjoying knitting. That's pretty cool. Diane.
Anatomy.
Sleeping with the puppy. Aw. Oh my gosh, they're going so fast. Okay, Leah. I have run adoption groups for 2 years in a row. Wow, that's pretty neat. That's amazing. Hi, Natalie. Hi, Quinn. Ooh, binge watching Grey's Anatomy, and the new season's out. I like how they encompassed like a little bit of COVID into it. I kind of like the shows are doing that. Carol, one of my dogs is also listening attentively. Mary, fun fact, I grew up in the house that I can do a headstand. Oh, that's cool. Anna, you're adopted from Brazil. That's pretty neat. Welcome, Anna. Molly, McLean, Tammy. I just had a baby boy that's almost 3 months old. Congratulations, Tammy. Oh,
great.
Feel free to share a picture in your camera. Judy, 2 crazy dogs that are keeping me sane during this time. Maurice, you say, I have been by the beach more in the past 3 months than I have in the past 3 years. Amen. That's amazing. Good for you. And I'm jealous. Let me know next time you go. Hi, Kelly. Hi, Emily. Fun fact, your birthday is on Christmas. I don't know if you enjoyed that growing up so much though, Emily. Debbie, you have a daughter that's adopted. Very cool. So glad you can join today.
Olga, I thought there was another Erica here. Is that right? Are there 2 of us today?
Are there?
I thought you had mentioned Erica. Maybe I just misheard.
Oh my gosh, did I? I've been going through all these names.
It's okay.
There's a lot of you guys here. Alex, Joss, Kathleen, Tom Harvey. What's your fun fact? Our cats like to dip into my Zoom meetings. I've been seeing so many pets. So cool. Hi, guys. Okay, there's so many of you. Robin, Annabelle. Oh, yes, another Erica. Erica Cartledge.
Okay, does she spell her name the same way I do? E-R-I-C-A, just one.
Yes.
It's a common name. There aren't too many of us.
The amazing Erica Cartledge from DCPS in the building. She must be Patty. All right, well, it is so great to see all of you guys. Thank you for introducing yourselves. I think it just makes it so much more personal to know who is here with us. Well, I know you're not here to listen to me talk either. So I'm gonna go ahead and pass it over to Erica Moltz with Adoptions Together, FamilyWorks Together. She is our wonderful speaker for today. So I will go ahead and pass it over to you.
Thank you, Olga, and thank you for your upbeat personality. It's great. Great way to start. My camera may be a little weird today. The one on my computer stopped working, and thank goodness I have this auxiliary camera. So I may have to move it around from time to time, and it's got me at kind of a funny angle, but bear with me. I'm really glad to be here. I want to let you know a little about myself. I have been in the field for many years. I started with Adoptions Together about 30 years ago when the agency first got started. We're a nonprofit in Maryland, Virginia, and DC. And the FamilyWorks Together part of our agency is where our counseling centers are, and also our training component. I do most of the training for the agency. I do training primarily around issues of adoption and trauma, attachment, FASD, and have done some international training as well. I really love training, and I'm thrilled to be here today. So, okay, let me move my screen along. Welcome. I'm glad you're all here. And as Olga pointed out, I am very comfortable with people interrupting for questions or comments, but I periodically will stop talking and give you a chance to say what you might want to say. Okay, so our goals today are to educate Fusion's community partners, which I assume you all are, and some of you also may be parents or adoptees yourselves, about an adopted teen's experience. What I want you to go away with today are strategies for thinking about what adoption means to teenagers and how to effectively talk to them about adoption. Our objectives are to focus on adoption sensitive language, to identify the 7 core adoption issues that are meaningful, salient for kids, to understand how children process adoption at different ages and stages, and to learn strategies for helping parents talk with teens about adoption. Because whether you're a therapist working with a family or a parent yourself, that's going to be important. So if you've met one adopted family, you've met one adoptive family. So we're certainly not going to generalize, because we will generalize, but we know that situations are so unique. So we're going to start with talking about positive adoption language. And this is not about being politically correct. It's really because words matter. Words matter because they impact the way an adoptee is going to feel about their adoption and how other folks perceive adoption around them. Also, using positive adoption language educates folks about adoption and provides models for in the community. So adoption has come such a long way. When I started in the field, I heard all the time, and I hear this so much less now, is a birth mother gave her child away or put her child up for adoption. You know, what that connotes to me is some sort of, haphazard plan or giving something away. I just gave a bunch of stuff to Goodwill last weekend and I said I gave it away. But what birth mothers do is they make an adoption plan. There's thoughtfulness and intentionality in that plan. And rather than saying natural parents or real parents, of course, birth mother, birth father, or biological parent, and parents who adopt, we don't have to call them adoptive parents, they are the parents, and they are the real parents. Children have 2 sets of parents, and the parents who adopted the child are the child's real parents. And rather than saying an adopted child, we just say a child who's joined the family by adoption, or parents say our child. So the other thing that we sometimes hear is keeping the child, that a birth parent kept their child. Really, it's that she decided and he decided to parent, or rather than keeping the child. So hopefully these are the kinds of phrases that you're hearing much more likely lately. I just actually read, because I've been doing so much reading during the pandemic. I read the new John Grisham book. I just finished it last night, and it was a great book in many ways. His treatment of adoption, however, was appalling. It was, adoption 20, 30 years ago, where you're not supposed to have contact with the birth parents and everything's supposed to be secret. So I'm about to write a letter to him, because I feel like authors as prolific as he is really needs to get on board with what's really the positive adoption language and positive adoption concepts. So what I want to talk about is how children understand adoption, because before we can really go into how to talk to them about adoption, we have to understand what their developmental level is. So kids who are under 3 years old really need to be hearing about their adoption, their gotcha day, how they joined their family from the very beginning. When you start reading books to kids, I recommend that adoption books become part of the selection of books that you have for the child. And if parents start early enough talking about adoption, then it just becomes normalized. It becomes it becomes part of who the child is. And children under 3 obviously really don't understand what's going on. They can repeat what their parents have told them, but they have no real comprehension. They may not even be able to correctly say the word. And at usually by 3 years old, though, kids pretty readily may share whatever adoption story their parents are sharing with them. And then when kids are between about 4 and 6 years old, they start to understand a little bit more about what adoption means. And usually they understand it because their peers may have pregnant moms. And so they begin to understand that they didn't grow inside their mom's uterus, belly, whatever way that, or body, however the mother may be talking about it. But they really can't get it because obviously they have such a rudimentary knowledge of conception and pregnancy, but they do have an idea at this age too that they were born in a hospital. That's the other important thing to start telling kids. But that's about all they really understand. My sister, my youngest sister, has 2 children who she adopted. And when my nephew was about just turned 4 years old, my sister told me that she and my brother-in-law had been reading lots of books to Max, and he really got the whole notion and concept of what adoption was. And I was like, oh, I don't know, but I didn't say anything. I thought, well, maybe he understands more than I think. Then my sister called me about a week later and said, never guess what happened. I picked Max up from preschool, and the teacher said to me, why is Max saying he's a doctor? Max thought that's what my sister was saying. Although he could tell the whole story, he really didn't understand it. So then if we move on to children who are between the ages of 7 or 11, they have a fuller understanding of what adoption means. And what we'll be talking today is the joys and the losses, because children at this age are beginning to understand that there are these other parents to whom they were born, and they sometimes there's an open relationship with them, and sometimes there isn't. But they begin to understand that along with the joys and advantages of being part of my family, maybe a disadvantage for me is that I've lost this other family, this other birth family. And they may begin to experience some grief at this point about their birth family. And it's between 7 and 11 that children begin to understand that they're different from their peers who are not adopted. And they understand that in kind of greater detail, because they also understand as they get to be about 11 that adoption is a legally binding experience, and that a judge put his or her stamp of approval on it. And so children begin to raise questions that vary over time as the child's understanding and comprehension of the concept of adoption continues. So what I hear from parents a lot is that, well, I read a lot of books to her when she was between 7 and 11, but now that, between 4 and 6, but now that my child is between 7 and 11, they kind of don't ask questions so much anymore. The really important part is that we don't want to wait for kids to ask questions. We are really encouraging parents to be very open about adoption and to talk to their kids about their story in a way so the child can process it. So we don't want to go, certainly we don't want to overwhelm the child with too much information, but this is the age when parents really need to be reaching out to kids and saying things like, it's Mother's Day, and on Mother's Day, I'm so glad you were my child. But sometimes I think about your birth mother, and I wonder, since we don't really have any contact with her anymore, I wonder how she's doing. I wonder if she's sad today. Do you ever think about your birth mom? And the child may respond, no, I don't think about her. That's fine. You don't have to force a child. It doesn't have to be a forced conversation. But what parents do is they leave the door open for the conversation. They leave the door open. So maybe in a week or a month or a year, the child can get back to it. And so it's throwing out, it's kind of like when you throw a pebble out in a lake and it skips along the water. So it reverberates. So giving a child permission to have feelings about adoption is what's really important. And then between about 12 and 18, kids really get what adoption means. And this is an age when kids are going through lots of identity issues. And part of the identity is, who am I like? You know, how am I different from my parents, my adoptive parents, but also how am I different from my birth parents? And this is an age when parents really have to get, and we'll talk about this much more as we go along, what the adolescent tasks are. Because a 16-year-old, if you say to your 16-year-old daughter, you know what, you can't go to the party, I'm sorry, you can't go to the party Saturday night because we're worried that there are no chaperones and we're concerned about drugs and alcohol being used. That kid may then say to their parents, I hate your effing guts. I want to live with my birth parents because they're cooler than you. That could be an adoption issue, but probably it's a really pissed off teenager. And so parents really have to understand what are typical issues and what are adoption issues, because all through a child's development, that you're going to parents, it's a regular family and issues come up around kids all the time. What parents have to tease out is what has to do with adoption and what has to do with just my unique child's needs, or what has to do with the age that they are. The other thing to remember too is that, and to think about, is that emancipation for kids who are getting ready to launch may be a bit more complicated by adoption, and we'll be getting into more of that. So I want to just stop for a moment and see if anyone has any questions or comments about this. Can either write it in the chat box or take yourself off mute. Okay.
Hi, Erica. I have a question.
Yes.
So, you know, I appreciate the pissed off adolescent, and I think that that's accurate. I think that one of the questions that I have is how you clarify whether it's a pissed off adolescent or if in fact that's sort of an emerging, well, my birth parent would never have said that to me.
That's a great question. And I think in the moment, you don't really discern. In the moment, you stick to the idea of you can't go to the party. But at some point, I mean, hopefully you'll have some idea at that point about really how salient those issues are for your teenager. And in any event, though, I get back to the comment maybe the next morning or maybe later on that day and really talk about, what are you thinking about with your birth family? What's going on that you think it would be cooler to live with them? What do you think you'd have that you don't have with your family, with us? So absolutely, it's important to tease out whether there really is an issue there or whether it's a pissed off kid. Sometimes, though, I think that parents may go out of their way to not or be more prone to maybe not set limits when a kid says something like that. And really that's a limit that has to be adhered to. And then it's a question of going back and kind of unpacking what might be behind that statement for that kid. So right. Is that helpful?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for asking that. Anybody else? Okay. So there are certainly complex circumstances. And as we're thinking about the different ages and stages, what can complicate things is, for example, if it's an international adoption, if a child was adopted at an older age, either from an orphanage or from the US foster care system, because then that child might have been and probably was exposed to complex developmental trauma, which is very different in many respects from PTSD. It begins when a child is subjected to the trauma, perhaps of abuse and neglect. And also a child then would experience distressed attachment. And those issues really put a layer of complexity on things that parents really have to understand really before they embark on the adoption, so that they can be prepared for these issues that come up and they can work on what they need to do to to help that child attach to them. The other complex circumstance might be transracial adoption, when a child is in between two races and cultures, and especially then identity issues are raised, because it may be, for example, being in between being a Black or you're in a white family and I'm a Black kid, and where do I fit in? The other complex circumstances can be intrauterine exposures, particularly alcohol, where fetal alcohol spectrum disorder might result in emotional and cognitive issues for a child. So that those both being adopted at an older age, transracial adoption, and intrauterine exposures means that parents have to also look through that lens when they're trying to discern, is this a normal developmental thing that's going on with my kid, or sort of a typical neurotypical issue? Does it have to do with adoption, or is what's behind their behavior having to do with the kind of adoption it is and the particular adoption circumstances? The other complex circumstance may be that there's lack of information about the birth family. If kids have a scarcity of information about the family that they were born into, that may lead to heightened anxiety about bodily changes, and actually fears that when they get to be teenagers, that how do they know that they're not dating their biological sibling? So that can add another layer of complexity. And then in the last 10 years, what's also really kind of muddied the waters is social media. When kids are in adoptions that don't have any level of openness, and that sometimes it ends up that kids and parents and biological families find each other on Facebook or whatever other platform that the kid might be involved in. So that can also be a complex circumstances that really parents and therapists have to be aware of. So I'm going to talk now about the 7 core adoption issues that affect teenagers. In the middle of all of them really are the issues of loss. And loss having to do with, which then could have to do with rejection, with guilt and shame, with grief, with identity, intimacy, and control issues. And I'm going to go through each one of those. And rather than viewing these issues as negative emotional baggage, my invitation is to view these core issues as by adoptive parents and professionals as a way to help guide a child or a teenager to self-awareness, strength, and resiliency. So the more that parents and therapists can understand and help kids unpack these issues, the stronger the bond with the adoptive family will be. And I think the stronger the child will feel inside. So the power of talking. This is a quote. Polly Van Goulden and Bartels Raab wrote a book many years ago. That's kind of one of my Bibles. And I cannot remember. Real Parents, Real Children is what it's called. And this is a quote from the book. When an open, accepting environment in which the child or teen can talk about and tackle adoption-related issues is established early on, the child will feel freer to turn to his parents to talk about problems as a teen. If parents deny their child's feelings or sweep them under the rug, then the family, the parents and the child alike, will have no system for addressing them when they intensify in adolescence. And we see this all the time in our counseling center. We are contacted very often by parents who have 11, 12-year-olds when everything is changing and kids are becoming much more confusing to parents, and parents are feeling more worried and less competent in what to do. And on top of that, adoption issues seem to be coming up. what we find is if those issues, again, are talked about throughout the child's development, then there certainly can be teen issues around it, but it's not this moment of reckoning that happens when parents are calling and saying help. So let me, sorry, I have to advance the slide. Okay, so first of all, adoption, as I talked about, is a loss. Just because the adults involved think that adoption offers a great many benefits and is a cause for celebration doesn't mean that the child will agree or adjust quickly to the new family constellation without mourning for the old family, wishing or hoping for reunification, or regretting what might have been. So it's the older child who perhaps will be in a deeper state of mourning if they've been adopted in an older age, because they may have more memory of their family, and they may have hoped for reunification if they were removed and put in foster care. But even infants who were adopted might go through periods of regretting what might have been. And that's not anything that is pathological. It's part of the adoption experience for a lot of kids. The other part of the experience is, why me? Why was I rejected? And we know that children take responsibility for the things that happen to them, including being abandoned, being abused, or neglected. And I've worked with so many kids who come from foster care and who were then adopted. I was a family therapist before I started focusing exclusively on training. And I remember this one 9-year-old child who had been adopted when he was about 8 years old into a wonderful, wonderful family, great kid. And he had been significantly abused or neglected in his earlier years and had kind of bounced from one foster home to another. And with my help, the parents really began to unpack what happened to him in his home, with his first family. And we kept talking to him about the fact that it wasn't his fault. And we really thought he was understanding that. We really thought he was getting that, until he got really mad at his parents one day in the session. And he said, I know why you adopted me, because you didn't care if I pooped too much. And his parents were like, wait, what? And he said, well, the reason I had to be taken away from my parents was that I pooped too much. And you didn't care if I pooped a lot when I came to your house. So even though we had spent weeks talking with him about the reasons that his parents could not take care of him, hopefully helping him to understand that it had nothing to do with him, that it had to do with adult issues, he's still in his heart, he's still on that, in that survival level, that a part of him was still operating from, thought that it had been his fault and that he had pooped too much. And this kind of thinking might result in, obviously, a child being sensitive to the slightest hint of rejection or disapproval, causing them to avoid situations where they can be rejected, or even to provoke rejection, so that the shoe is going to drop and I don't have to think when it's going to happen. Because, kids think, well, and even with an infant adoption, why did my birth mother leave me? Why did she think I wasn't worth keeping? There must be something about me. This is especially salient if the birth mother had other children before this child was, an adoption plan was made for this child, or before this child was removed, or if the birth mother went on to have other children subsequently. So any questions about these two, just thinking about the loss and the rejection before we move on?
There actually is one question, and it's from Judy. She asked how, and I think maybe you can address this at a later point, but it says, how can a parent bring up adoption to a child who was never told in the beginning?
Who was never told they were adopted from the beginning? Yeah, that's really, really tricky. And I worry, honestly, about the family and the child if the child hasn't been told. that's really, that's something that will really, I think, require the family to seek counseling and to have help with talking to the child about the adoption, about being adopted. I don't know how old this child is. That's going to depend a lot on how they're going to tell the child. But if the child is older, what they have to be really mindful of, what this family needs to be mindful of, is that the fact that this has been kept a secret might really erode the trust or affect the trust the child has in the parents. So I would really suggest that the family contact an adoption specialist, an adoption expert who could really help them through this issue and really help them work with the parents and then work with the family. So I hope that's helpful.
Thank you. And I know Diane, Dom, I saw your hand up. Not sure if you had a question, but I'll give you the floor for a second if you do.
Okay. Okay, I'll move on and I'll stop again if anyone has anything. So now we're going to talk about guilt and shame. Shame is very much related to what I just talked about, with kids thinking that somehow they were rejected because of something they did or some part of who they are. So shame is that deep feeling of something is wrong with me. Something is wrong with me for my parents to throw me away. And as much as parents can certainly use appropriate positive adoption language, kids still might have this feeling. And that's what parents need to be aware of. Children really need to understand that adults are totally 100% responsible for what happens, not them. And the child didn't cause bad things to happen by being who they are, even if they wished or imagined that they could have other parents. So children need, I think, from a very early age, a picture of their family of origin as they can process the information at an age-appropriate level, so they can begin to identify with positives about the birth family. Always, it's important for parents to hold the birth family in their hearts with respect and reverence, and communicate that respect and reverence to a child. So another issue is identity. Who are my people and am I going to be like them? So identity is defined both by what one is and by what one is not. So adoptees frequently wonder who they really are and where they belong. Are they more like their birth family or their adoptive family? What have they inherited? What have they acquired? You know, if they have a birth parent, if they find out their birth parent was in jail, and we'll talk about how to talk about these difficult issues later on in the presentation. But if they find out something that's really hard, like my birth mother was an addict, or my birth father was incarcerated at one point, kids wonder, what does that mean for me? So for a child for a child to feel whole, they need to develop an identity that includes the past, the present, and the future. And again, it's crucial to provide positive information about birth family history so the child has positive role models. This is especially salient with transracial adoptions. Transracial adoptions are conspicuous, and kids get a lot more negativity coming their way. You know, well, she's your real mom. She didn't look like you. Well, how come your real mom gave you away? Why aren't you the same race? Or kids hearing how lucky they are as a Black child being adopted by this affluent white family, for example. So there are lots of issues that come up for kids when it's a transracial or transcultural adoption. So identity for kids, where do I fit in? How does my birth family figure into my life? Should I forget about them? Because if I don't, am I going to hurt my real family, my adoptive family? Am I going to be like them? And who does that make me? Those are really important issues that adoptees struggle with. Now, again, for some kids, these may be issues that come up in a very peripheral way. And for some kids, these are issues that come up frequently for them. It's really hard to know. It's really hard to know what is what is it for some kids that make it even more of an important issue. So one of the things that we do with the teenagers we see in our practice and with their families is we have them generate, like, what did I get from my birth family? I got the color of my skin, I got the shape of my eyes, the texture of my hair. And wait, yeah, I remember hearing my birth mother was a soccer player. Maybe I got my love for soccer or my physical dexterity from her. I don't know. Or maybe that's just me, because certainly my adoptive family aren't into sports. They're into hiking. I like to do that. They're into reading. They have great senses of humor, and I've gotten that from them, but I haven't gotten any of my sports stuff from them. So what's just me? This is what kids need help with. And the more that parents can tolerate and hold kids talking about the complex feelings that they may have, especially when they're teenagers, the more kids can make sense of this. So before I go on to intimacy, anything about identity? Identity is a really big issue. Those of you who work with adolescents know that. Any comments about that?
We have 3 questions.
Mm-hmm.
So one is from Debbie. She asks, will you get to how to help a child who has concerns about why she was abandoned, international adoption at birth, and or what we can say as parents when we have been very open?
Yes, I'm going to talk more about specific circumstances and talking about a child's adoption story. So I'm glad you're bringing that up. Bear with me and we'll get to that a bit later.
Great question for Molly. I'm wondering about those of us who are not parents of students who've been adopted and are not their therapist. What should we take into account with this information around rejection and awareness in a classroom setting as their teachers? Is it really around the adoption sensitive language only, or is there more that we should be doing?
That's a great question. And our agency does a lot of training and workshops in schools around how to really revise or create curriculum that's adoption sensitive. And I mean, hopefully this presentation will help you be thinking about that. But, things like genetic, asking about bringing in a baby picture, for example, seems like a pretty benign assignment, but it isn't benign if a child doesn't have a baby picture because they were adopted from overseas and they were in an orphanage and abandoned. They would not have a baby picture. So, really thinking about the curriculum and how it needs to include how all families look. Some children are adopted, have single parents. Some children who aren't adopted have gay or lesbian parents. So there are so many ways that families come together in schools, really, I think you all know, have to recognize that. The other thing that's important is that the teachers understand issues around openness, because kids at different ages may talk about that more than they would perhaps when they're more private as they get older. So teachers also have to understand kind of what to do with some of those issues. That's not necessarily for this presentation, but there's certainly lots of books, and we can consult with you if you wanted any assistance with that. So I hope that gave you kind of an answer. Thank you. Was there another question, Olga?
Yes, it's from Carol. She asks, in a closed international adoption, we have information that is limited to a very brief translated statement of background. some of which may likely be fabricated to have facilitated the adoption. Any recommendations on how to deal with absence of information?
That's really hard. It's really hard. And undoubtedly at some point your child is going to want to know more. And it's going to be painful, I think, to say we don't have it. The good news is it sounds like my guess is you probably tried to get more information. It wasn't available to you. And so one of the things to really talk to a child about, let's imagine what could have been going on in your birth parent's life, in the country where you were adopted from. What were the circumstances? What could have been her circumstances? Why would it have been difficult for her to take care of you? And, sometimes kids write letters to a birth parent, even though there's no birth parent to send it to, just with the questions they might want to ask. The point is that, and I'll talk about this much more later, but parents just really need to hold that with the child. There are lots of ways that you really can't make that better. It's just got to be what it has to be. And holding a child in whatever reactions they're having to the lack of information is what's important. Not trying to make it better or kind of like, well, you're with us now and everything's cool. That's not what kids need to hear. They really need to be held in their with their feelings. And we'll talk about that as we go along as well. Okay, so intimacy. Intimacy is about the multiple ongoing losses in around adoption that may affect the development of interpersonal relationships or intimacy for adoptees. This is especially important for kids who are adopted at older ages and may have had a disrupted or distressed attachment. We know that adult attachment styles have a lot to do with what happened to kids. And so the placement and subsequent losses that kids may have had may have disrupted their early bonding and attachment experiences, and that may show up later and interfere with intimacy in adult relationships or even intimacy with the adopted family. So mastery and control. This is a big one. I mean, this is what teenagers are about. Teenagers are about, you can't control me. And this is a point in a kid's life when he or she may realize that they had no control over the loss of their birth family or in the choice of who their adoptive family is, that was completely out of their control. They may wonder, how come everybody made these decisions for me and I didn't have anything to do with it? They also they may not have information that they haven't had anything to do with, or they may want to meet their siblings or their parents, but there are their birth parents, but there are rules about when that can happen. They can't start really searching for some until they're 18, and maybe they're not even going to be able to get any information. So the adoptee may feel that they have to be in control of something. So they may push against parents even more than neurotypical teens might. So common questions adopted teens deal with. Where's your real mom? He's not your real dad. So why didn't your birth mother want you? Where are your real siblings? Because the siblings in your family, in your adoptive family, aren't real siblings. Why are you and your brother different colors? Are you Guatemalan or American? You're Black, but you hang out with the white kids. Why? Or you're so lucky. Think about how you'd be living in these terrible circumstances if you weren't adopted. Or where did you come from? A lot of kids, adopted domestically are asked that. Where did you come from? And the answer is, Suitland, Maryland. Huh? That's where I came from. Okay. So responses to others. Parents really need to help children respond to these unwanted comments. And this is where teachers can come in as well. Teachers and parents need to help kids respond. And parents, to begin with, need to model appropriate responses. So if you have a 1-year-old and you're a white parent raising a black child, then at 1, how you respond to a nosy comment or an intrusive comment, it's not going to matter too much because your child's not going to understand a word you're saying. But it gives a parent time to practice, So by the time the child is old enough, they have a way of responding to comments from folks. And maybe, a friend of mine, she and her wife have a Guatemalan child and an African-American child. And it was a few months ago before COVID, and they were in one of those eateries at the mall. And there's some, they're both white. Yeah. And there was some folks at the next table who started looking at them really kind of like disapprovingly and going, that sort of noise they were making, and they just got really bad vibes. So one of the folks at the next table, they were an older couple, the woman said to the man, "Wow, that's a weird family." And my friend and her wife just got up. They took the kid, they said to the kids, who were they were 12 and 14 at the time, "Let's just move to a different table." And so they went and moved to a different table. Because both my friend and her wife were exhausted. It had been a long day and they did not want to deal with this obnoxious couple. But on the way home in the car, they turned to their son and their daughter and they said, "We were just exhausted. We didn't want to deal with it. What could we have said? What do you think we should have said?" Because parents aren't always going to respond appropriately, but they need to repair things when they don't respond appropriately, because kids really are going to model how they talk about adoption from their parents. So I suggest to parents that they use an acronym TIP. If a kid is asked a question or a comment has been made, they can tell their story. It's their story to tell. Yeah, I was adopted from Guatemala when I was 4. And my parents were living in poverty at the time, and they put me in an orphanage when I was 2, and luckily I was adopted. Or they can completely ignore the question or the comment and change the subject, or make a joke, or any way they want to get out of it. Or they can say outright, "It's private. It's none of your business. It's not a secret, but it's private to my family." And how a child is going to deal with things is going to be so different depending on their age and their emotional developmental level. So a friend of mine had a child she was olive complected. She and her husband both like I am. And the kid had really light hair, like white blonde hair. And when the little girl was younger and they would take her to the hairdresser, and the hairdresser would say, "Where did you get," if both parents were with this girl, the hairdresser would say, "Where did you get your hair? That's the most amazing colors. Your parents both have dark hair." Well, the little girl would say, "I got it from my birth mother because, we see her twice a year and we have an open adoption, and that's where I got my beautiful hair." And the hairdresser would be like, "TMI, I don't want to hear all that." But the child, Carrie, was really open with the information when she was 7, 8. But then when she was 11 and 12, or even starting at 10, when asked that same question, what she would say is, "It runs in my family," because she would want to keep that information private. So parents really need to gauge, they really need to be aware that you can't, it's not about brushing people off and walking away. It's really about intentionally responding. Or if you don't, talking to a child about why you didn't respond in that moment. So any questions about that? Okay. So again, difficult circumstances. These are some of the difficult circumstances. And there was a question about abandonment. That's absolutely a difficult circumstance. And another one is physical and/or sexual abuse, and how to talk to kids about that. Severe neglect, having a parent who was a substance abuser, parents who lived in poverty or had mental illness or were imprisoned, or parents that used toxic substances during pregnancy. So these are some of the very difficult circumstances that make it harder for parents to know how to talk to their kids about adoption. And that may then lead to a parent being scared to tell a child their full birth history. Oops. Because parents are worried that if they talk about all the details or a lot of the details, that they're going to lose their child's love and loyalty. For example, if you say to a child, you were removed, your birth mother couldn't take care of you when she was pregnant with you, she couldn't take care of you because she was really poor and just knew she didn't have the money at that point in her life, the houses, the resources, the support to raise you. So she made a plan, and now, and luckily, she chose us to be your adoptive parents. A child could turn around and say, well, why didn't you give her money? You had money at the time. That's a really difficult question to answer, but by God, it's a legitimate one. So a parent sometimes parents are afraid about what can of worms they will open up if they talk about these kinds of circumstances. They're worried that their child will develop a poor self-image, or that maybe the kid is going through something hard in their life, in school or with friends, or maybe they've had a significant loss of a grandparent and they don't want to tell the information at the wrong time or in the wrong way. Sometimes parents are afraid that if they talk a lot about circumstances, birth history circumstances, that it's going to be a self-fulfilling prophecy and the child somehow will think that they came from bad genes. Or parents may be afraid that they're not able to share the information in a positive way because they're so pissed off at the birth parents. And parents are afraid that their children are going to be hurt and overwhelmed with sadness or pain. And, I have 2 adult children at this point, and I still will do anything to not have them feel pain. So that's something that we carry with us. We don't want our children to feel pain. However, kids need the facts. Kids need the facts. Facts help them, keep them from developing unrealistic, either positive or negative fantasies. It's funny, this really speaks to how old I am, but my husband and I have been watching The Crown. And, I remember I had Queen Elizabeth cutouts when I was a kid. And I remember going to my parents when I was like 8 years old and saying, I think I'm really Queen Elizabeth's daughter. I mean, I was just infatuated with her. I have no idea why, but I was infatuated with her. I think some of us who aren't adopted may have had those kind of fantasies. You could certainly understand children who are adopted having lots of fantasies. Children also need the facts because the facts help them develop a positive identity. Facts prevent a child from developing confusion and conflict or divided loyalties, because that's difficult for a child to manage if they think that having questions and maybe positive feelings about their birth parents will hurt their adoptive parents so much that they can't bring it up, that it's not safe to bring it up, that they may have these sometimes, naturally ambivalent feelings. Also, facts combat magical thinking. They prevent kids, I think, from feeling extreme sadness, pain, and confusion. Facts really help, if anything, to manage the adoption. And most importantly, it increases their trust that their parents share important information honestly with them. And, family attachment and loyalty really is based on trust in so many ways. So any questions about this before I move on? Anything in the chat box, Olga?
Nope. We are good.
Okay, great. So the idea of secrets versus confidentiality or keeping things private. So in my opinion, and in working in this field for so many years, secrets damage families. You may not know, you don't know what you don't know about your child's birth family, but if you keep secrets, that is what could damage the family. Secrets also have power over family members. Secrets also distort reality and undermine trust and intimacy. And as I talked about, produce fantasies. And secrets destroy the authenticity that families need to be based on and kindle shame and evoke fear. A fear of like, well, what else don't I know, right? What else don't I know? On the other hand, it's important that parents protect the information that is their child's. And we say this to me, our adoption agency places infants with parents many times a year. And with each one of those adoptions, we really emphasize the idea that the parents need to keep the information private in their family, to the nuclear family, not talk about information, even if it's positive, to family members and friends. If instead, keep it confidential, keep it private, because the information is really the child's information. And keeping it private prevents children from finding out information before they're ready to know, because maybe you didn't want to tell their child that their father was a really great basketball player because the kid isn't good at sports. Or maybe you didn't want to tell your daughter that her mom was on her way to Juilliard. So even positive information at the wrong time, if someone tells your child, let's say your child doesn't want to practice the piano and you're fighting with the kid about giving up piano lessons, and then grandma remembers that the child's birth mother was on her way to Juilliard and that's why she made the adoption plan. You know, you lose control of the information when grandma tells your kid, why don't you want to practice the piano? Your mom is probably maybe a great musician now in her life. So keeping things private and confidential protect and strengthen a family. And not keeping secrets teaches a family to deal with issues openly and honestly within the nuclear family. So this is perhaps the most important takeaway of the presentation. And that is that it's really important to help a child hold the feelings. Parents really need to deal with their own reactions. They need to reflect on what's happening for them when they feel like they've been hit in the stomach when a child starts talking about their birth family. You know, what's going on for them, because parents have to be able to manage their own pain so they can be there for their child. A parent might feel a lot of pain still about perhaps a history of infertility and all that they went through before this adoption, before they were able to adopt. So there may be buttons that are being pushed. Parents may be triggered by what their own history is and their own sense of disappointment and remorse about not having a biological child. It doesn't mean they don't love their adopted child completely and totally, but they still may have some feelings left over from infertility. Or parents may feel very, very angry at birth parents who did wrong by a child, who abused them or neglected them. And so when children are curious and have positive feelings about birth parents, adoptive parents may have difficulty managing their own pain when their child is suffering. So the tendency is to problem solve and make their child feel better. This is what I think gets families in trouble, sort of brushing it under the rug and saying, well, you know, you're so lucky that we adopted you. We don't know what your future might have been had you stayed in China or Guatemala or inner city Baltimore, because we took you away from all that. And we are so lucky to have you, and you are so lucky to have us. I mean, all of that is true. But that's not what children need to hear. Children need, rather than being made to feel better, they need to just talk through these issues at their developmental level. Children need to know that their feelings aren't too big for their parents, which doesn't mean that parents have to always be perfect in their responses, but if not, they need to go back and fix it. So if your kid says something like, I hate your guts and I wish that 16-year-old, I want to go live with my birth family. The next day, the parent needs to go back and says, I got really pissed when you said that because I was setting a limit about that party and you were trying to manipulate me. But let's sit down and talk about your birth family now. So children need time, space, and permission to process their losses. And if children are able to do that, again, at their developmental level, so you're not going to make a 5-year-old talk about something that's too difficult for them to understand, but you really need to do it with older children. Parents and professionals don't have to take away the pain or fix it. These things, it's not about fixing it. It's just about leaving room for it. So before actually, whoops, sorry, let me go back. I didn't mean to go to that. There we go. So I did want to address the issue. I know somebody had asked about abandonment, or just talking about some of the really difficult issues that may come up around explaining to a child that their parent might have abused drugs or alcohol, or explaining about abandonment. And I think, again, it has to be at the developmental level of the child, but you could say to a young child, your birth mother, for instance, we do a lot, we have done in the past, many adoptions from China. And it's often, especially historically, that many children were abandoned in China. And there's a historical reason for that. There was a societal reason for that. And children need to have that explained to them, that your birth mother abandoned you. It's called abandonment, but really what she did was she left you somewhere safe, like a firehouse, police station, an orphanage, because she knew that someone would find you and take good care of you. And this is why she had to do that. This is why she couldn't just walk up to the doors of the orphanage and hand you over to them. This is what was going on. And then let the child have their feelings about that. Or if a birth mother abused drugs, and that's why a child perhaps was taken from the family when they were 2 or 3, or maybe that's why the birth mother made an adoption plan with the child from birth. It's really talking about drug abuse is an illness, and your mom felt really sick when she didn't have the drugs that she was used to using, and she couldn't really live very well without those drugs. So it's got to be in context, and allowing a child to have all kinds of feelings about that. As kids grow older, also talking to them, for example, about the possible predisposition to substance abuse because a birth parent may have been a substance user. So it gets really complicated. And my advice to you all to parents is to seek professional help if it really feels like the story is so complex, especially something like sexual abuse. You really need to work with professionals who understand adoption issues and understand trauma and attachment as well. So before we move on to talking about openness, does anyone have any additional questions for me about that or about anything?
There is one question that we have from 2 participants. Anything I can do as a stepmom, or how can this relate from a stepmom's perspective?
Well, let me, Olga, can I say something? Because I piggybacked on that. And that's what I was thinking. This is a phenomenal presentation. I really love the details and the thoroughness.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And I was attending this as a therapist, and somebody did chat about being a stepmom. I'm a stepmom, and a lot of this does relate to being a stepmom, which is fascinating to me because I wasn't drawing that connection. And so it really does. And people especially if there's issues, so to say, with one of the biological parents, whether it's alcoholism, drug addiction, that type of thing, and navigating a lot of these tricky, just tricky conversations.
Yeah,
so
tricky. Very tricky.
Yeah. So I appreciate what you said, because
Go ahead. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, I was going to say I took some notes because I do work with clients who are adopted, a lot of them internationally, but some of them through the foster care. But what's interesting too, yes, is that even as a step parent, people will say just what I think is just odd, or, just what does it matter? Like, I take care of my grandkids, and people say, step grandkids, but people will say things. And so it's just interesting that I agree that people say things, and I just didn't think about that piece too, because I haven't always known what to say with the kids, or even the grandkids. So it's just interesting that I think just across the board, your presentation is really good, and I've gotten a lot out of it personally as well.
Oh, well, I'm glad about that. And you must be dealing with, there's so much ambivalence in these kinds of situations. Kids hold, as do we, hold so much ambivalence. And if they can just bring that to the light, into the light, and really have a conversation. And those conversations often come up at, late at night when when the kids are younger and you're trying to put them to bed, or when they're in the back seat of the car and you're in traffic. They come up at the worst time. So you don't always have to have the conversation right then. But my message is, kids just really need to be able to talk about this, or it's going to go underground. And when it goes underground is when it bubbles up. And when, as therapists, we see kids who are kind of going off the rails a little bit when they get to be adolescents. So yeah, I mean, I totally get the step parent. I totally get the analogy with step parents, because it's difficult to explain sometimes, and kids get questions and you get questions. So thank you for that.
So that was my question. I was the person that made that. So I'm a stepmom, and my youngest stepchild was adopted by my husband and his first wife. So I have this really unusual situation.
Yeah, lots of layers of that one. Yeah.
Exactly. And it's difficult, because not only when people ask me, people think that the children are all mine.
Right.
So they think that this child that was adopted from Russia is my child because she's blonde. And my stepson looks just like his father, so they see that he's the dad and just assume I'm the mom. And so it kind of creates this awkward thing. And then we're also dealing with international adoption, and then also alcohol abuse was how she ended up with the whole adoption situation in Russia. And so she's now almost 16 and very rebellious, and typical teenage thing of, I want to drink, I want to smoke vapes, I want to smoke marijuana. And we're trying to be honest with her and say, you have a family linked to some of these problems, and we really need to steer clear of them, because it's really best for your health. And she's very angry. Yeah. Very, very angry.
I really hope, I think, Diane, I hope you're getting support, because this sounds really tough. There are a lot of layers to this situation. I really hope your family is getting support. And that's one of the things we really emphasize at our agency, the importance of family support, not just to take the kids and fix, quote unquote, fix them, but to really, have somebody be able to work with your whole family around these issues. So
do you know of anyone? Because right now we're not really getting anything. The agency that my husband and his first wife adopted Elena from dried up, because Russian adoptions are closed right now. So they pretty much had no support.
At the end of this presentation, I'll have a slide about our counseling services. So you're welcome to call us, because that's what we do. That's what we do.
Everything you're saying is so perfect. I wish I could just have you move in with us for a couple of months.
Thank you.
You could you could get everything back on the right way. So
Well,
I
I'm
hope
sick of
that your
being-
family will miss you.
Thank you. I'm sick of being in my house, so maybe I'll take you up on that. I might want to move to
Oh
a new
yeah, we have a
home.
new puppy and 3 new kittens, so we have a mess at our
Oh.
place right now.
Sounding more inviting.
This
So
is so awesome. I'm just so happy that I found this, and I found a lot of really good information. I actually know 2 of the people here, Kelly Henderson and Ms. Rosen. So I know them from other things. So this area is so wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you. So, thank you.
Appreciate
I'm going to move on to talking, before we end, I'm going to get this in there, the importance of openness. So when our agency started in 1990 and we would talk about openness, people looked at us like we were absolutely out to lunch. Like, what are you talking about? And that was this John Grisham book that I was telling you about. Totally closed to openness. Openness in adoption has been supported by research for 30 years and also supported by our agency practices and most reputable agencies. And most importantly, openness in adoption is supported by the words of adult adoptees who are in closed adoptions and have lots of negative feelings about that. So sometimes adoption has to be closed. I understand that, because it's an international adoption, you don't have any information, or because birth parents aren't willing to be in an open relationship. But the most important thing is that children benefit from openness in adoption. And what I mean by openness is anything from the exchange of letters and pictures to the adoptive parents meeting the birth parents, all the way to the birth parents coming to the child's birthday parties. There's no one way to define it. The important thing is it's built on trust, that no one situation is good for everyone. And certainly if you're not trusting or feel that birth parents are harmful in some way, then a relationship is not appropriate. It is absolutely not co-parenting. Even if the birth mother's coming to birthday parties, the birth mother is not the parent. The real parents are the parents who adopted the child. That is essential to understand. It is not like when you get divorced and you have a shared custody. That's hopefully co-parenting, good co-parenting. This is not that. Birth mothers have a role in a child's life to be like a godmother or an aunt or a good friend or something like that. But the benefits for the child is they have more self-confidence, they understand where they came from, it lessens a sense of abandonment. They don't need to get to be 18 and have this big search day. They're medically informed because, adoption agencies and international who do domestic and international adoption do get a medical history, but it changes. Nobody stays the same. Birth parents may develop medical issues. And there are more kids and there are more people in a child's life to care about them. So I'm going to go through tips for talking about adoption. It's important. This is kind of coming to the end. So it's important to initiate conversations, to use positive adoption language, never lie to a child about the past or a birth family member. If you don't think the child is old enough or emotionally mature enough to handle it, put it in a way that's age appropriate, but do not lie. Omit is okay, lying isn't. Allow a child to express anger towards a birth family without joining in. They can be furious, but don't get on that bandwagon. Always parents have to convey respect and reverence for a birth family. If information is negative, consider using a therapist to help with telling the child. And you don't have to, but if you're feeling anxious about it, that may be a good way to go. Don't try to fix the pain of the adoption. Don't impose value judgments on the information about the birth family. And again, a child should have control of telling their story outside the immediate family. You may cringe when they say too much when they're 8 years old, and you may talk to them about consequences when they do that, but it's their right to share information. Also, remember, a child probably knows much more than you think they do. That's about everything with kids. Share information in a developmentally appropriate way. Be calm and matter of fact without dismissing your child's feelings. Be empathetic and understanding. Be aware of your nonverbal and verbal messages. And just remember, it's not about you. It's not about the birth family. It's about the kid. It's about the child. Whoops. So we did questions and answers. We have maybe a couple of minutes for that. Now it's right, Olga, we have a few minutes before we have to end. We maybe have room for a couple of questions.
Yes. And in the meantime, too, I am sending out in the chat the link for the evaluation to receive CU credits if anybody needs that. So please look at the chat to get that link. But we have about 5 minutes for Q&A. So if anybody has a question, please feel free. Oh, Kathleen, can you have we went just name
I have a question.
Yeah. Beth, one sec. Kathleen's question and then Beth, you're next. Erica,
Okay.
can you bring up the 7 issues again, what they were? That one slide.
There we go.
And Beth, floor's all yours.
Okay, so my question is it appropriate and when to share with your child that there may have been substance abuse in utero?
Yeah, that's a really tough one. If a child is having issues, learning differences, for example, or emotional issues that possibly could be related to substance abuse in utero, I think it's important to bring it up. It's child's information. And as long as it's brought up in the context of, it's important for us to understand what happened so we can know how best to help you through whatever the child needs from you or from the parent. So again, I think, if it depends on how old the child is. Certainly a younger child will need a lot more they won't understand what substance abuse is. Older children will. But it shouldn't ever prevent a family from getting a neuropsych so they can determine perhaps if it was alcohol or drugs, how the brain's been affected, how the child has been affected.
Mm-hmm.
I hope that answers your question.
That's helpful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
We have a question from Debbie. Going back to the abandonment, do you have any suggestions on how you would respond when they ask why they were abandoned? I think somehow she feels that she's broken, even though generally very adapted.
Yeah, I mean, whatever the circumstances were, that it had nothing to do with her, with the child. It had to do, any child would have been abandoned because of the circumstances in the birth parent's life, whatever they were. And those circumstances were really, really hard. And this child was abandoned to get a better life and to end up in a safe place. So that's the truth. It's not trying to make, you certainly can allow a child to vent about being abandoned, but really to explain that it's not them in particular. It would have been any child. It had nothing to do with their personality or the way they looked or any of that.
Thank you, Erica. Can you also go back to the slide number 4 about grief?
Adopt this one? I'm not sure.
I think.
Yeah, I'm not sure which exact slide. Do you have a particular question? Because you'll get a copy of this PowerPoint.
Yeah, we'll send that out, Kathleen.
Okay. Okay, I'm going to move ahead to the very end. So what I suggest is that you leave here, whether you're a therapist or a parent or a teacher or a prospective parent, whatever role you're in, something that to be intentional, taking something intentionally away from the presentation. Either something you plan to not continue to do in your work or in your parenting, something you're curious about, or something you want to plan to start doing that you kind of feel energy and you're gung-ho about, just to leave with an intentionality. And FamilyWorks Together provides counseling. We have offices all over the place. We provide counseling for blended, foster, adoptive, kinship, and guardianship families. And we also have a support group for parents. It's free. It meets every Thursday night by Zoom, and it's a great group. And so there's information about that in here. And then this is the telephone number. That's my phone number for the agency. And so if you want to see counseling or training or a support group, you can call that number and just say what it is you want. You'll be immediately connected. We still have a lot of real life people still answer our phones, believe it or not. But you can also email me if you have a particular question. Thank you. It has been an absolute pleasure to be here. I love that you all just popped in with questions. That really helps me to keep my energy going. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Erica, for time and putting together this amazing presentation. I mean, the entire chat box, everyone is just really expressing how much they appreciate it, how much they got out of it. So thank you so much for sharing with us today. And thank you everybody for attending, spending your time with us on a Friday. I really appreciate it. I will send out the link to the recording. Diane, I saw that you want to share this with Dad, so we'll definitely send this out, all the resources that Erica mentioned, including the PowerPoint. And I hope you all have a wonderful Thanksgiving, a wonderful holiday time and season, and everybody stay well, stay healthy, stay safe, and I look forward to seeing you all at our next Lunch and Learn.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you, Olga. Take good care.
Take care.
Happy Thanksgiving.